We're assessing CEOs and how are they going to navigate in the new AI world. And that
you test for technical competence?
So it's really interesting. Yes, there's technical competency, but there's also empathy. There's also getting in front of employees and being very curious on change. There's more it's actually more than the technical piece, much more. It's more, are you ready to pivot into this next generation, this new world?
One thing I'm fascinated by this, sometimes a COO, first of all, thank you, Tom, Bill, nice to see you. We didn't plan our wardrobes, so we're good. But the COO role is sometimes an heir apparent role, sometimes it's very different. So can we just level set a little bit? I'm going to start because essentially you're in that role a little bit as well. So you're living the dream. How often does it actually happen that it is a step up in this day and age?
So in the Fortune 500, about 2/3 of your succession comes internally right now. What's also interesting we were talking about is 1/3 of current CEOs, when their time is up, they go to be the executive chair of the board. So you might be a little bit tired of he or she who's your CEO, but they're not going anywhere.
Your dad is still there.
they're still hanging around. That's not what
I would do.
Right.
But when you say internal, it can also be the CFO is now a common route to the CEO role. But
what we see for analytics on this is it's the obvious number 2. So it could be COO, it could be president, no matter how you name it. The other place, and if you look at larger scale companies, one of the bigger business units that runs their own P&L, that individual he or she could be getting groomed to be the CEO.
Okay. Bill, what do you think?
Well, I mean, for sure, there's an American phenomenon there, which is in the US, many, many more CEOs will be chair. And then you have just the disposition of, are they really just biding their time until they're the chair only? So are they, outward facing or inward facing, and what path did they come from? Because for sure, the yard they spent the most time in is the one they're still going to want to look back at. So I'd get really, really clear with the CEO about their actual preference, even if there's, sort of granted delegation from the board to the CEO and then the CEO to this role. You do have to be really specific about where they want you to play. And then likely the people who report to you are nearby, who actually gets to hold the P&L. So it is just, it sounds simple, but classic role clarity is a huge deal. Before you know it, you're having, fighting contests with the CEO and trying to catch them when they're getting coffee.
Go ahead. You want to say something?
Yeah, I also think when you are the number 2, it's very important to be very crisp with the CEO and board of what your current brand and remit is and what the gaps are in filling those in.
So you're the number 2.
I'm the number 2.
So can I make it personal for a second, since we're among friends here? And what are the challenges that you see in your role? Because even just the nature of a role that's internal facing, the first thing they ask as CEOs, what's your vision? So how do you deal with that?
Well, it's interesting because being the number 2 COO president, you end up being Dr. No a lot. And the great thing about being a CEO is you can be the most popular person in the building and say, go talk to the CEO or president about that, right? Oh, you want more budget for 2025? You should go talk to the COO or the president about that. I'm the fun person who does the strategy, right? So one is, because really candidly, everybody, I came in second place. I was the internal, we went external. I came in second place to be the next CEO of Heidrick. And part of the brand piece of it is when I'm in front of the board, in front of our executive team, is not just talking about purely operational things. It's being a part of the strategy, talking to the board. We just had a strategy meeting 3 weeks ago, talking to the board of the next gen of our company and what our strategy is super important, and making sure they know you have that muscle.
Also, you advise a lot of executives in these positions. What advice do you give them?
Well, it's super interesting. I was at McKinsey. We spent a bunch of time on how you make money and how you run the place. And then at Modern, we get to add who runs the place. And that last part, it is interesting how at times, just when you're looking at the composition of a top team, are they behaving as people who share a boss, or are they behaving actually as officers? And so for sure, what you were just describing, if you're an officer, you actually do need to have some interchangeability. You have your day job and the thing you look after, but each of you should be able to have a strategic lens, a financial lens. The composition of the team becomes really important in terms of complementary skills and how you can be deployed. Think of the CEO getting executive leverage from that small group of people. Mm-hmm. It's really surprising, but many times they're cobbled together not with a thought of the composition of the team, but individuals' rim shots. And then they find themselves together and go, well, how do we actually play together? Particularly in the post-SOX environment where many CFOs think,
Sarbanes-Oxley.
thank you.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
We've been doing this for long, where I'll use an acronym and Diane will explain it, and it's wonderful.
No, I'll clarify it just in case you're talking about socks that you're wearing.
Oh, yeah, my two small ones.
Sarbanes-Oxley.
Yes.
So in the
Many
post-Sarbanes-Oxley environment, they had to sign
CFOs
off, yeah.
assumed that they had the run. And certain sectors you'll see where the chief financial officer will have almost an inside track. But like in your experience, you could say, well, you could go to someone who had experience in search, someone who had experience in consulting, or someone else. Right. I just think the idea of what the board was looking for last time should inform what they might be looking for next time, and decide if you can get that experience in that role or not.
Well, let me pivot from, obviously we're talking now about the transition to CEO, but let's talk about what kind of CEO companies need. There's what they look for, and there's also like the optimal leaders and the success factors. Has it changed at all? I mean, of course, there's certain core competencies, but here we are, this age of ambiguity, all these jobs are going to change. So how does that impact the kind of CEO?
Well, I think it's significantly changed in the last 18 months. We're now assessing, we do probably more of the biggest CEO searches than any other company. We're assessing CEOs and how are they going to navigate in the new AI world. And that
you test for technical competence?
So it's really interesting. Yes, there's technical competency, but there's also empathy. There's also getting in front of employees and being very curious on change. There's more it's actually more than the technical piece, much more. It's more, are you ready to pivot into this next generation, this new world? But, I was sitting down with one of the top CHROs of a tech company, one of the 5 biggest tech companies in the world.
Rhymes with, no.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
BM. And she asked me, are my engineers potentially AI engineers? And how do I get this next generation of workforce that we have in-house? Because there will be more AI jobs than there are AI engineers. And the CEO that is really crisp on that and thinks about how do you go get that talent is going to win.
How do you think about this, Bill, in terms of the skill sets and even the fact, like talk about Silicon Valley, I'm going back to a book you wrote where so many of them are proud of eliminating middle management. You talk Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, it's like the people they want to get rid of are often the people from which you draw your leadership pool.
Right, well, I mean, for so many, particularly in tech, but not just tech, they love playing with other people's capital, and they're saying, if you just trust my brilliance, I'll come up with the answer, honest, it'll be just fine. I do think the rise of the individual contributor, often seen in tech, particularly with emphasis in coding, but brilliance in computer science, but also other places where it's heavy IP-oriented. They don't think about cadres, they think about stars. Mm-hmm. And so if the culture is based on stars, at some point you have to decide, are you always going to go outside and run culture risk and culture fit risk? Or will at some point you say, these 25 roles in our model matter more than others, and we're going to say 50 for 20, that kind of orientation, and we're going to start growing a cadre where you forcibly move them around. And you see whether or not they have the dexterity to talk to frontline employees. They have the financial acumen to know how you make money. That sort of stuff. I think it needs to be far more purposeful, or you are always going to find where the incumbent is found to be lacking relative to the star on the outside, because you always look better when you're on the outside. Always.
Do you? But yet most companies hire internally.
Well, we were talking about this. I think there's an ebb and flow in terms of particularly when the CEO went into the chair's role, which will be saying, okay, things were going well, and how strong the outside lead director is on whether or not they want an injection of new thinking. And if you have anything even resembling a downturn, you will go outside way more often.
Does this tendency to recognize excellence in a form that reminds us of ourselves, is that shifting as the world changes more quickly? Insofar as, you recognize, there's a certain aspect of successful leaders of, you remind me of me at 33, 43, 53, yeah. Right? And that is a factor in why you don't see diversity in some of these choices. Do you think that that's changing?
It has to, because we were just talking about technology.
It has to and does change, isn't it?
It has to, and I think it progressively is changing, because I do think the technology mindset is progressing. It doesn't matter if you're Walmart, if you're Ralph Lauren, if you're United Health. Every company now says they're a tech company. I mean, who in the room doesn't say they're tech-enabled in a tech company right now? If you do not have that distinctive mindset, you cannot be a next-generation CEO. That's what we're telling to our clients.
So let's be tactical here. And let's assume everybody here either maybe some are CEOs, but they want to be in the bigger leadership role. What are some of the tactical things besides obviously learning a baseline foundation of AI? What kind of work do you do with people who are basically being honed and trained like athletes for the top job?
Well, I mean, sometimes I think the most important thing is acknowledging that their own personal brand is an asset for them, and it may or may not be tied to that company. So I guess like when I've had clients who were in this position, I'd say, look, you have to decide whether or not it has to be that job, or it can be that one, another one. And even you see it with CHROs, same thing, which is saying, hey, you want board jobs at the end, we got to put you in play. Right, you have to start being out there and being seen by other boards for other jobs. I think the same thing for COO going to COO, which is how important is it to you to have that seat, and get really clear on their own personal plan, and then have a real conversation again with the outside lead director and with the COO, particularly if they're the chair, about what are the skills that they want to develop and experiences, classic knowledge, skills, attributes, experiences. What are the experiences they want to be able to point to the next time they're up for something, and can they get it here or not? And if they can't, they either need to go out on another board or be given some kind of a clearly noted special, like the vice president taking over like the recovery of the automotive industry, whatever. Something you can signpost and go, this was mine. If you can't get that, you're probably in the wrong job anyway, because they're not actively trying to help you.
What's been your experience in terms of your own, you talked a little bit about, how you got to where you are. Being in that COO role in essence, what have you learned in terms of how you're keeping yourself in that? Obviously, you aspire to be a leader. You put yourself up for it. So how do you introduce vision? How do you introduce some of these other aspects when you're the Dr. No?
Well, part of it is behavioral. When you go to the offices across the world, it's don't talk about budget the entire time.
It's lucky you're both named Tom.
No, right. Right. No, I mean, I think part of it is, I think about what my talk track is. I think I'm hitting 12 offices by the end of the year. What's my talk track when I get in front of the employee base, number one? Two is the board's only 4 times a year, making sure you have the right time to talk about things, not just about making a number for that quarter, because they know I can make the number. That's why they put me in the job.
We've been talking about teamship yesterday. By the way, I'm going to take some questions from the floor. If you have any, just raise your hand. We've got mic runners. So, but we were talking about this shift. I'm going to go to you for a second, Bill, but things like really kind of reimagining the structure of companies, right? We've talked sometimes about companies being ecosystems as we talk about things like remote versus in-person and how you engage and motivate teams differently. How do you see the structure of companies shifting in ways that call for a different type of leadership?
There was a period of time when we talked about, the CEO, the CFO, and the CHRO sort of as like the 3G, right? The CEO got to uniquely say, how am I going to make money, and how am I going to run the place? Strategy and culture. The CFO got you cash, capital, and credit, although none of us were ever worried about capital and credit because the money was so cheap. And the CHRO got you people. Increasingly, I think as you've seen a return to an amalgamation of businesses where the economic models of different BUs were different, you did need someone who could be an integrator. So the extent to which it's a role now where the BUs are allocated, that COO now probably has to be there, almost a reformation of the kitchen cabinet. Now, I like that idea quite a bit. The complexity, of course, is with the proliferation of all those CXO titles. Well, who isn't at the kitchen cabinet? And is there, a front bench and a back bench kind of thing? In some cases, I think the COO job, in many cases, can be the consigliere to the consigliere.
Well, now we have
actually keep the rest assuaged.
We have this founder mindset now where you can have 67 direct reports, right? So who needs a COO anyway? Do we have a question from the audience? Just raise your hand if you do. In the meantime, let me talk a little bit about sort of the next steps, because the qualities of it, there's the vision and strategy of the company.
Yep.
There's obviously replacing yourself, and there's also creating a leadership team. How are leadership teams changing right now? You mentioned this proliferation of new titles. COO often now is in combination with different titles, so somebody's a CHRO plus COO, they're a CFO plus a COO. What are you seeing in terms of how the optimal leadership team changes?
What I would say is the CHRO has a different seat at the table than they did before the pandemic. So
And they've kept that seat at the table, or
it's
they've
actually
been booted
it's a much
back?
more significant seat at the table. So going back to work, how to work in the pandemic. There's many cases where we saw the CHRO reporting the CFO or being layered. That just doesn't happen anymore.
Very rarely.
It's very rarely, and that role has taken a significant step up. And we actually see the CHRO is very engaged in board discussions, CEO succession discussions, where before they just weren't. So I would say that role has significantly stepped up. I would say if people in the room are looking to step up themselves to take the next CEO role, be honest with who you are and what you need to complement yourself. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and making sure that you have a leadership team around you that's that next generation leadership team that you have a plan with that will complement your skill set.
How about yourself, both in terms of the composition of teams and how you're working with teams differently?
Well, for sure, the rise of CHROs sounds strange, but I'd say more amalgamation. I mean, there's been an interesting run of employee experience, customer experience, maybe community experience being bolted together, right? And so you have CHROs getting marketing, CHROs getting, a lot of the ESG stuff. I think is interesting. For me, I would say, particularly for, let's say, traditional COOs, two thoughts. One, the minute the board says that you are the chosen one, I would add the president title immediately.
Why?
Well, part of it is, I think, even if people are being nice about it, having a horse race is destructive just from energy.
Totally agree with that. Yeah.
Right? It just is.
Yeah,
Call
totally
it what it is. If you get to stay because you're a valued member, wonderful. If you don't, make it really easy to leave. That would be one. Second, I would find a way, if I were in the COO role, to work better with regulatory, risk, and compliance. In many cases, people with long P&L experiences resent the classic third rail functions. You need to be friends with finance and HR because you need money and people, but you often resent the people because they're governing functions. I might find a way to work with them just as a rounding experience, because when you're in the top seat, they're your best friends because they keep you out of the ditch and out of the paper.
The average tenure of CEOs has gone down, I believe. I think that continues to happen. So why aren't they succeeding in the job? Why aren't they sticking around 20 years the way some used to? Maybe, of course, we look back differently on some of those 20-year CEOs, but what is it that is keeping people in that seat for less time?
One, I think, the boards are significantly tougher, and you don't have the old boy network on the boards like you used to have. I mean, if we look 10, 15 years ago, and we look at the composition of some of the boards, it was the CEO and his or her friends. It's very different now, and people are driving shareholder value in a different way and being very tough on CEOs about are they creating the next generation market value and really looking at their peer companies to make sure they are doing that. So the boardroom is not the friendly boardroom that it used to be, and I actually think that's okay.
Although I've had CEOs tell me it takes 5 years to become good at the job. I know that was, lucky you if you get that. Let me be tactical in the minutes.
Can we give you one on that one? I think,
Please.
and particularly for selection. Obviously, hashtag selection matters. Of course it does. Most boards, it's not obvious to me that they're willing to take an honest look at the pile they're handing to the next person. Right? It's like, oh, you hit the ground and everything's just fine because we were in charge. That's just nonsense. The vast majority of the time, if it got bad enough that you had to move on somebody, it's not great, and you only know a portion of what's not great.
Right. They have to come in and lift the
Yeah,
mat
a
and
real
go, what?
honest reckoning about what's the aspiration. Make sure the person you're hiring buys into that aspiration, not wants to take the 2-year walk around and decide on their own. And what are you actually handing them?
Yep. So let's get some takeaways. I'll start with you, Bill. What advice, whatever, that you think is important to think about for those who aspire to a bigger leadership role, or even just they're looking at the leadership roles within their companies and want to optimize it?
Look, I think the first one is biding your time is a bad way to live. I think you have to really want the job and believe the job is a natural progression in your own experience. And then it can be kind of fun, right? And you really think you're part of something. If you're just holding down time until you get picked for the next one, I'm not sure that's great. It's own the job you're in and be great at it and be thoughtful about it, right? Find yourself in it. Otherwise, I'd say it's the bad job for you.
Tom?
So I hate politics, but if you want to move up in the current company you're in, get relationships with the board. I made that mistake. I knew the chairman pretty well. I didn't know the other board members that well. And after the entire process, now I'm spending time with them regularly. Make sure you have those relationships and be very bold about yourself. Ask the chairperson, ask your current CEO, what are your strengths, what are your development opportunities, and how do you get there? You'd rather know now if you're 2 to 3 years away and work on the development areas that you can and be very upfront with the chairman, with the CEO. I have some gaps, and this is how I'm going to work on them.
Excellent. I love that. Well, please join me in thanking Tom and Bill, and good luck.